Hello, I'm Thomas at Art and Lit Matters. I want to welcome all of you to our 2-week-long plunge into the wondrous world of T.S. Eliot's 1922 poem, The Wasteland. It's been 4 decades since I first heard a recording of that astonishing poem, and like everybody else who hears it for the first time, I was completely at sea. What are all these quotes from foreign languages? What is this jumping around from voice to voice? But at the same time that it raised so many questions, there was an intimation for me of some intense power within and beneath the lines. I was enthralled by hearing it and enthralled by the music of T.S. Eliot's verse, which is unlike that of anyone else. So I kept listening to it and I kept reading it again and again, and then read it with the different eyes you look at a poem in college, and then with the very critical and sort of historical based eyes you look at it in grad school. And then for most of my life, I've just enjoyed it every couple months, listening to the poem or rereading it. And now I am thrilled to have a chance to dive in it again, but this time as a group. The poem is divided into 5 parts. The first, the burial of the dead, a phrase which is taken from the Anglican liturgy and prayer book. The second is called A Game of Chess. Sounds like a pretty generic title, except Eliot has multiple references to Jacobean playwrights, which tended to be highly expressionistic, a little bit transgressive, a little bit edgy, and always on the wild side. And interestingly, we're writing in response to a period of plague, a period of uncertainty about succession. They were the poets and playwrights that came in the wake of the death of Queen Elizabeth and the assumption of James I. And it was a wild and whirling time, very much like the 1920s, which were, of course, reeling from the psychological and practical cost of the First World War. The third section is called the Fire Sermon, and the fourth, Death by Water, which is so short, I might as well tell you it now. Phlebas, the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, forgot the cry of gulls and the deep sea swells and the prophet and the loss. A current under sea picked his bones and whispers as he rose and fell. He passed the stages of his age and youth, entering the whirlpool, Gentile or Jew. O you who turn the wheel and look to windward, consider Phlebas, who was once handsome and tall as you. And then the fifth and final part of the poem is called What the Thunder Said. After the torchlight red on sweaty faces, after the frosty silence in the garden, after the agony in stony places, prison and palace and reverberation of thunder of spring over distant mountains. It's got a magnificent music to it. It's very much my favorite part, but unlike every other part of the poem, it just poured out in this one day inspiration, and it was so unlike his usual composition, which would happen in fits and starts and fragments and stretched out over a long period of time and often required a lot of revision. This came out pretty much in the form that we have it now. And there are passages in it which are so moving. Ganga was sunken, and the limp leaves waited for rain, while the black clouds gathered far distant over Himavant. The jungle crouched, humped in silence. Then spoke the thunder, Da, Data. What have we given, my friend? Blood shaking my heart. The awful daring of a moment's surrender, which an age of prudence can never retract. By this, and this only, we have existed, which is not to be found in our obituaries. What the Thunder Said is magnificent. But first takeaway, it helps if you think of the poem as you're encountering it in its 5 distinct parts: the burial of the dead, a game of chess, the fire sermon, death by water, and what the thunder said. And as disparate as those parts are, as much as there is a kind of centrifugal force in the way reflecting the I can connect nothing with nothing fragmentation of the time. There's also a continual counterforce that moves in a sort of centripetal or gravitational force, pulling the poem together in a cohesive whole. And the more you read it, the more you realize that every single part of the poem reflects every other. And in spite of the sense and ethos and anguish cry of I can connect nothing with nothing, it is a poem where the fragments come together in a unified whole. Eliot literally says, these fragments I have shored against my ruin. Eliot reaches so far back into the tale of the tribe, into our own generative tales of mythology and ancient lore and biblical text and everything else, to pull together those fragments into a somewhat unified whole. And so one of the things that the poem achieves is, in a time of post-war disillusionment, destruction of a sort of central faith, what you have is a poem that doesn't mince anything about the fracturing I can connect nothing with nothing pressures of the time, but also exerts a beautiful and mighty and musical force, pulling the whole poem into a unity. Later on, Eliot will talk in his writing about James Joyce Ulysses of employing the mythic method, which is reaching back into the tale of the tribe, reaching back towards mythology, regathering these pieces as part of our psyches, part of our being, part of our soul. This method he called the mythic method, and it is, in his words, a way of giving a shape and order and significance to the vast panorama of anarchy and futility, which is contemporary history. Well, he was speaking about Joyce's Ulysses, but I think it is perhaps the best single description of the wasteland in existence. Though the poem had a very long gestational period with traces of it going back to Eliot's early work, most of it was written in 1920 and 21. A lot of it during rest cures at Margate or by Lake Geneva. Now, the poem that Eliot had at the beginning of 1922 was a very different poem from the one we have now. In fact, the title was not The Wasteland, but it was He Do the Police in Different Voices, which is taken from Charles Dickens, our mutual friend, and refers to a young man who would theatrically read the newspaper. He'd do the police in different voices. I'm glad he eventually chose the wasteland over He'd do the police in different voices, but the original title is revealing because the poem is an assemblage of so many disparate voices, and getting a handle on those voices is so much a part of appreciating the poem. It begins with the sort of staid and omniscient, ethereal, restrained voice. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. But even there, voice is funny because it's always an echo chamber. We hear even in that first line, April is the cruelest month, an echo of Chaucer's famous line, Juan that April and his surest suit the root of March hath pierced to the root and bathed every vein in sweet liqueur, of which virtue engendered is to flour. And this whole succession in poetry as April and spring celebrated as a time of new life, of fecundity, of rebirth. And how far from that is Eliot's April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land. And there's an echo in lilacs too, with lilacs as the mournful plant in Whitman's great When Lilacs Last in Dooryard Bloom. First you have the staid, somewhat restrained, but omniscient, ethereal voice, April is the cruelest month, and then you have the encounter in the Hofgarten, and please excuse my atrocious German, but bin gar kein Russian. I am not a Russian, bin gar kein Russian, stamm aus Litauen. I am a Lithuanian, ek Deutsch, a true German, and you have one of many scenes illustrating the sort of displacement of nationalities and loyalties and a general sense of everyone as a sort of refugee in the wake of the war. And when we were children, staying at the Archduke's, my cousin's, He took me out on a sled, and I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. And down we went. In the mountains, there you feel free. I read much of the night and go south in the winter. So already we have 4 or 5 different distinct voices. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different from either your shadow at morning striding behind you or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear in a handful of dust. Fritz Weterwind, der Heimat zu, mein irisch Kind, wo weilest du? And that is from Wagner. And then what is perhaps the most emotional scene in the whole poem, you gave me hyacinths first, a year ago. They called me the hyacinth girl, yet when you came back late from the hyacinth garden, your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak, and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing. Into the heart of light, the silence, Oden Leer das Meer. Madame Sosostris, famous clairvoyant, had a bad cold, nevertheless is known to be the wisest woman in Europe, with a wicked pack of cards. And so it goes on, a sort of succession of polyphonous voices. In the second section of the poem, A Game of Chess, many of the voices are taken right out of the contentious and famously dysfunctional marriage between T.S. Eliot and the brilliant Vivian Haywood. My nerves are bad tonight. Yes, bad. Stay with me. Speak to me. Why do you never speak? Speak. What are you thinking? What thinking? What are you thinking of? I never know what you are thinking. Think. I think we're in Rat's Alley, where the dead men lost their bones. What is that noise? What is the wind doing now? Nothing. Again, nothing. Do you know nothing? Do you see nothing? Do you remember nothing? I remember those are pearls that were his eyes. Are you alive or not? Is there nothing in your head but, oh, that Shakespearean rag. It's so elegant, so intelligent. What shall I do now? What shall I do? I shall rush out as I am and walk the street with my hair down so. What shall we do tomorrow? What shall we ever do? The hot water at 10, and if it rains, a closed car at 4, and we shall play a game of chess, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door. And then another change. When Lil's husband got demobbed, I said, I didn't mince my words. I said to her myself, hurry up, please, it's time. Now Albert's coming back. Make yourself a bit smart. He'll want to know what you done with that money he gave you to get yourself some teeth. He did. I was there. You have 'em all out, Lil, he said, and get a nice set, he said. I swear I can't bear to look at you, and no more can't I said. And think of poor Albert. He's been in the army 4 years. He wants a good time. And if you don't give it to him, there's others will, I said. Oh, is there, she said. Something to that, I said. Then I'll know who to thank. Part of that is not written by T.S. Eliot at all. It's Vivian Eliot's contributions, and we will go over her contributions in a future video. And speaking of voices, often it's a character in the poem, but sometimes it's an echo of a prior work, like Dante, who is throughout this poem. When Eliot writes, unreal city under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many I had not thought death had undone so many. The line is right out of the Inferno, and yet Eliot makes it urgently modern in this cityscape of the unreal city under the brown fog of a winter dawn. A crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many I had not thought death had undone so many. Sighs short and infrequent were exhaled, and each man fixed his eyes before his feet flowed up the hill and down King William Street to where St. Mary Woolnoth kept the hours. There I saw one I knew and stopped him crying, Stetson, you who were with me in the ships at Miley, that corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Will it bloom this year? Oh, keep the dog far hence, that's friend to men, or with his nails he'll dig it up again. You, hypocrite lector, mon semblable, mon frère. Okay, in that brief passage, Unreal City feels a lot like Baudelaire, and so many I had not thought death had undone so many is straight out of Dante. And yet the scene has such a vivid and urgent modernity. We see the people walking across the bridge. So in that brief passage, Unreal City is completely evocative of Baudelaire or André Belle's Petersburg, or the whole flaneur in the modern city experiencing its unrealities. Dostoevsky too, Unreal City, under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge, and so many I had not thought death had undone so many is right out of Dante, but it's Dante suddenly made urgently modern, entirely consistent with Eliot's theoretical ideas about the contemporaneity of the past. The past is something that's not truly past. It's continually impinging and really part of the present. And then you have another voice. There I saw one I knew and stopped him crying, Stetson, you who were with me at the ships at Miley, Miley's right out of Homer. That corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Or will it bloom this year? Or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed? Oh, keep the dog far hence, that's friend to men, or with his nails he'll dig it up again. And you have the upsurging of a thanatic or death energy from the war. Oh, keep the dog far hence that's friend to men, or with his nails he'll dig it up again. And the return of the corpse, the return of the repressed, the return of the blood and slaughter of the recently ended war. And finally, Baudelaire again. You hypocrite lector, mon semblable, mon frère, you hypocritical reader, my mirror, my resemblance, my brother, and this direct, intimate invocation to the reader. So much to explore in The Wasteland, but I think I'll stop there for today. Over the next 2 weeks, while our group explores The Wasteland, I will do a number of special topic videos exploring some particular theme or subject related to The Wasteland. Tomorrow's video is about The Wasteland as it appeared in the November 1922 issue of The Dial, flanked by things like poems by Hilda Doolittle or sculptures by Brancusi, and I'll show why that makes a difference. Thank you for watching.